Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The maps were spread across steel, corners pinned by empty mugs and ashtrays heavy with hours of nerves. Red lines carved across the plains, arrows stabbing into the heart of their defense. Around the table, men spoke quickly, overlapping, their voices hard, brittle. But none of them met her eyes. None asked her opinion. She sat with her hands clasped, gloves still smelling faintly of jet fuel, helmet on the chair beside her. The war outside was measured in tanks and artillery, not aircraft like hers. That was the message in every sideways glance, every cleared throat. "Those columns will cut through the ridges before dusk," one major said, stabbing his finger down onto the map. "If we don't pull back to secondary positions, we'll lose the entire flank." "Pull back and we concede the river," another snapped. "You know what that means." Voices rose, tangled, desperate. No one spoke of hope, only of choices between defeat now or defeat later. Kept her eyes lowered. The words pressed against her chest, heavy, smothering. Every instinct urged her to speak, to remind them she was still here. But what would she say? That her aircraft, old, bruised, dismissed as obsolete, could somehow hold back the avalanche of armor that had chewed through everything else. They wouldn't listen. They never did. So she stayed silent. It wasn't pride. It was survival. If she let their disbelief pierce her heart now, she wouldn't have the strength to fly when the time came. And the time was coming. She could feel it like a storm pressing against the walls, waiting to break. The walls shook first. A distant boom rolled through the bunker, followed by another closer. Coffee cups rattled, maps slid from the table. Men fell quiet. They knew what that rhythm meant. Tanks, dozens, maybe more. The column had begun its push. One officer clutched the radio handset, voice cracking as he tried to sound authoritative. "Confirm position. What sector?" The reply was a scream drowned in static. Another impact sent dust cascading from the ceiling. Looked up. The silence around her wasn't silence at all. It was resignation. Men already seeing the end written in fire. And still, not one of them turned to her. She rose without a word, collected her helmet and walked out. The air outside smelled of earth and gasoline, smoke already drifting over the. She pulled the visor down, strapping the helmet tight, the sound sealing her inside a world of her own. Each step toward the runway carried weight, but it was a weight she had carried for years. Being doubted, being dismissed, flying anyway. The A-10 waited, crouched like a battered beast under the fatting sky. Its paint was scratched, panels patched with mismatched plates. Nothing sleek or beautiful about it. Just blunt power, wings bristling with ordnance. A machine the new generation had laughed at until they needed it. Climbed the ladder, each rung echoing with memory. Her father's voice years ago when she first announced she would fly. "They'll never let you, not the way you want, not in combat." Her own reply sharp, "Too young. Then I'll fight twice as hard." She slid into the seat, straps pulled tight across her chest, hands steady as they moved across switches. The cockpit came alive in bursts of green and amber. HUD symbols flickered onto glass. The engines rumbled awake, low and guttural, as if reluctant to leave the ground. She whispered to it like she always did, "Come on, old girl, one more dance." The runway blurred beneath her, and then the ground fell away. Above the smoke, the horizon stretched in bruised orange light, broken only by plumes of fire where shells had already struck. Below, the armored column moved like an avalanche of steel. Dozens of tanks in tight formation, tracks grinding earth into dust. Each turret swung with mechanical patience, firing rhythmically, the battlefield convulsing under their march. Leveled out, breath steady. She knew what they didn't. She knew that her aircraft wasn't about elegance or speed. It was about staying when others couldn't. It was about breaking the myth of invincibility that rode with those tanks. Her targeting reticle blinked, the first lock. "Target acquired," she muttered, calm, detached, the way she always sounded when everything inside her was shaking. The GAU-8 cannon thundered. The sound wasn't sound. It was a vibration that rattled her bones, a scream of metal ripping through the air. Depleted uranium rounds poured downward in a continuous growl, a stitched line of fire carving straight into the lead tank. Steel tore like bark. A turret vaulted skyward, flipping before crashing in flames. Another tank folded inward, armor peeling back as if it were paper. Pulled up sharply, the plane vibrating, smoke spiraling from her wings. Below, men who had been moments from fleeing froze in disbelief. The unstoppable column had paused. The avalanche faltered. In the dugout, officers who had ignored her now pressed their binoculars to the glass, mouths open, unable to speak. On the ground, soldiers lifted their heads from the dirt. For the first time in hours, their eyes didn't just hold fear. They held something else. Hoping. Banked again, circling for another run. Tracer fire clawed skyward, streaks of light tearing past her canopy. She dipped lower, hugging the contours of the hills, weaving between bursts of shrapnel. The cockpit rattled, alarms flaring, but her hands were steady. "Stay with me," she whispered, "just a little longer." The column roared below, still pressing forward but no longer with certainty. They were adjusting, learning, desperate to adapt. She had forced hesitation into their rhythm, and hesitation, she knew, could break even the strongest tide. She rolled inverted, the battlefield stretched beneath her like a broken chessboard. For a fleeting instant, she let herself believe she could stop them. Then the alarm screamed. Missiles, heat-seekers climbing fast, streaks of smoke against the horizon. Her stomach dropped, but her grip didn't waver. She slammed the stick forward, though plummeting like a stone. G-forces crushed her into the seat, vision narrowing. Trails of smoke streaked past the canopy, one detonating in a fireball behind her tail. Shrapnel peppered the glass. Her breath came in ragged bursts, but she pulled the nose level just above the tree line, wings trembling, body burning. The aircraft held, but alive. On the ground, men clenched their fists, watching the missiles curve and fall short. She was still there, still circling. Steadied her breath, eyes blazing behind the visor. The tanks below pressed forward again, slower now but not unstoppable, not anymore. She turned into the dive once more. Not today, she told herself, not on my watch. And the battlefield, for the first time, held its breath. What kind of courage makes someone dive again into fire when every instinct screams to turn away? Asked herself that as the horizon spun in her canopy. Her body ached, her breath came sharp through the mask, but her hand never left the stick. The A-10 leveled, heavy wings vibrating in the air. Beneath her, the armored column reformed, commanders barking orders through radios, turrets swiveling with frustrated precision. They had expected the line to collapse. They had expected fear to scatter the infantry. Instead, they now had a predator overhead, and predators changed everything. In the dugout, the colonel who had dismissed her sat frozen, binoculars pressed so tightly to his face they left red rings on his skin. The officers around him whispered in disbelief. None of their strategies had bought time. Not trenches, not mines, not artillery, only the lone pilot in the sky. But didn't hear their awe. Her world was narrowed to the trembling lines on her HUD, the thrum of the GAU-8 beneath her seat, and the constant threat of those white trails rising from the forest edge. Every second, the possibility of fire filled her mind. And yet she pressed forward. The column tried a new tactic. Tanks pushed burning wrecks ahead of them, makeshift shields glowing red as they were shoved forward. The smell of scorched steel rose through the smoke, acrid even through the sealed cockpit. His jaw tightened. They were adapting. She banked left, pulling into another dive. Cluster munitions spilled from her wings, splitting in midair into a rain of submunitions. The explosions rippled outward in a chain, shockwaves lifting dirt and steel. Tanks bucked under the impact, hatches bursting open in flames. Infantrymen who had been huddled in despair now surged to their feet, rifles raised, shouts ripping from raw throats. They weren't running anymore. They were firing, advancing even, as though the roar above had stitched their broken courage back together. In the cockpit, felt the rhythm of it, the way the battlefield's pulse had changed. Her cannon wasn't just tearing into armor. It was rewriting the story that every soldier believed about this fight. But battles punish belief. The shrill alarm tore through her helmet again, a sound she had already begun to hate. She glanced down, missile lock, closer than before. Her stomach clenched. She pulled hard, the A-10 dropping low, so low the treetops clawed at her belly. Branches cracked against the fuselage, sparks skittering across glass. Two missiles followed, weaving like serpents through smoke. One slammed into a ridge, detonating in a pillar of dirt and flame. The other clipped the treetops, exploding behind her tail. Her plane shook, bolts rattling like loose bones. Her breath caught in her chest. For a moment she thought the old beast wouldn't hold. But then the rattle settled, the engines roared, and the warthog endured. The infantry below stared upward, disbelief etched into every face. She had death again. But knew what they didn't. She couldn't do this forever. Her ammunition gauges blinked lower with every run. Her body was already screaming with fatigue, and the tanks, though slowed, weren't broken. She pulled back into the sky, sweat dripping down her temple beneath the helmet. And then she saw it. Movement from the tree line, not the ordinary armor, something larger. A shadow breaking branches like kindling, pushing forward with deliberate weight. The monster. Its shape dwarfed the wrecks around it, its turret rotating with unnatural precision. The armor gleamed black, layered like the hide of some ancient beast. Its visor lit with its contact, and her stomach turned cold. She had heard rumors, prototypes whispered about in half-believed reports, tanks built to shrug off everything in the arsenal, machines that made war planes obsolete. She had dismissed them as exaggeration. Now one crawled into the open, surrounded by the smoldering ruins of its fallen allies. The colonel in the bunker saw it too. His lips parted. The voice that left him was hoarse, stripped of its certainty. No aircraft can stop that thing. Get her out of there. But didn't hear his fear. Or maybe she did, and she refused to let it take root in her chest. She pushed the throttle forward. The A-10 howled as she swung into a wide circle, eyes locked on the behemoth below. The monster fired first. The concussion ripped through the sky, a deeper, heavier sound than any cannon before it. The shell slammed into the ridge, tossing men like earth blossoming in a mushroom of dust. Dove, sun glinting off her wings. The GAU-8 roared, spitting fire into the giant's armor. Sparks sprayed, shallow scars etched into its hide, but nothing broke. Her breath caught as she pulled up. For the first time, her weapon had failed. The revelation seared through her. She couldn't pierce it head-on. Every dive was now a gamble without promise. But quitting wasn't in her blood. She banked higher, searching for terrain she could use, scanning for weaknesses. Wrecks, craters, shadows, anything. Below, the giant pushed forward, tracks grinding through fire, shrugging off small arms fire as if it were rain. The soldiers in the trenches watched with hollow eyes. Their salvation above now seemed powerless. Their whispers carried like a contagion. If she can't stop it, no one can. His breath steadied even as her pulse hammered. Fear tried to claw up her throat. She pressed it down. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because fear was useless now. "All right," she whispered into her mask, words only the old warthog could hear. "Let's see who breaks first." She tilted into another dive, this time not for the turret, but the ground beside the beast. Her cannon thundered, carving into the earth, ripping open craters that buckled beneath the tank's tracks. The giant lurched, dipping sideways, one tread grinding into the hole. It staggered. The trenches erupted in shouts. Soldiers roared, disbelief turning into wild hope. She hadn't pierced it. She had made the battlefield itself betray it. Pulled up, lungs burning, the war plane rattling under strain. She looked back over her shoulder, visor reflecting the monster's silhouette. Still moving, slower, but not invincible anymore. And then something else. On her HUD, a diamond blinked, a marker she hadn't set. Her eyes narrowed. Another one appeared, painting the side of a camouflaged launcher hidden in the ridge. Her lips parted. Someone down there was guiding her. She turned, lining up the reticle cannon, snarling. The hidden launcher exploded in a bloom of fire, debris scattering skyward. Cheers erupted from the trenches. She allowed herself a faint smile. The unseen ally marked another target, then another. Each strike widened the cracks in the enemy's shield. Inside a shallow trench, the young UAV operator gripped his battered controls, sweat running down his temple. His drone buzzed high above, invisible in the smoke. He had been ordered to conserve its power. Instead, he orders, because he believed in her. Together, without words, they turned the impossible into something fragile, something that could be broken. The behemoth below groaned, turret swiveling again. Saw it adjust, saw the barrel align, her breath steadied. She had learned its rhythm now. It wasn't unstoppable. Nothing was. She pulled the nose of the warthog around, eyes narrowing, hands steady. The sky trembled with her engines. The ground shook with the beast's tread. Two wills, two machines. And the battlefield, for a moment, seemed to pause between them, waiting to see which would break first. How do you fight something built to make you irrelevant? Asked herself as the giant rolled across the plain, its silhouette cutting through fire and smoke like a fortress on tracks. Its barrel moved with slow precision, hunting her shadow in the sky. Every tremor of the earth reminded her of its weight, of the certainty it carried with each step. She circled high, the warthog groaning under her touch. Panels rattled, alarms still whispered from earlier missile dodges. Her machine bore scars just as she did, yet both still endured. Below, men in the trenches clutched their rifles without raising them. They had already seen small arms fire ping harmlessly off the beast's hide. They stared upward instead, as if willing to be more than human, to be myth, to be enough. In the bunker, the colonel's hand shook around his radio. He wanted to order her back. Every instinct screamed to save the last thing holding his line together, but his voice caught in his throat. He knew if he pulled her out, the line would break within minutes. He said nothing. He simply watched. Inhaled, slow and steady. Fear whispered that she was outmatched, that nothing in her arsenal could break the monster below. She pressed it down, not because the fear was wrong, but because surrendering to it would kill more than her. Her HUD flashed again. Another diamond marker appeared, faint, pulsing. The UAV operator was still with her, still painting targets she couldn't see through the smoke. She banked, lining up with the glowing shape. Her cannon snarled, rounds chewing into the earth around the giant's flank. Dirt erupted, craters splitting, forcing the beast to lurch. Its tread dipped, dragged, struggled to regain balance. It wasn't enough, but it was something. She pulled up, chest straining against the harness, breath ragged. Her body screamed for relief, for stillness. But stillness wasn't survival. Motion was life. The giant roared back. Its cannon thundered, the concussion rattling even her canopy. The shell tore through the air where she had been seconds before, exploding in a shockwave that shoved the warthog like a child's toy. Warnings flared crimson across her panel. She fought the spin, muscles burning, teeth clenched. "Stay with me," she growled, voice trembling with effort. "Stay with me." The plane steadied, battered but alive. On the ground, soldiers ducked at the blast, then looked up again, desperate. They saw her silhouette still circling, and their shoulders straightened. They had begun to measure their hope not in their own strength, but in whether she remained in the sky. And she remained. Banked higher, searching. Her eyes caught it, the faint shimmer along the giant's back. Heat vents, straining under its immense weight, barely visible through smoke. Not invulnerable, just hidden. Her jaw tightened. She had one chance. She climbed into the sun's glare, positioning herself where the beast's gunners would be blinded. The light wrapped her machine in fire. From below, she was nothing but brilliance. Then she dove. Engines howled, air screaming past the fuselage. The GAU-8 thundered, its guttural roar stitching fire into the vents. Sparks cascaded. Smoke belched. For a heartbeat, she thought it might collapse, but the giant refused. Its turret snapped with terrifying speed, belching another round. The blast split the sky beside her. The shockwave hammered her sideways, cockpit shuddering like it would tear apart. She fought it, muscles screaming, arms burning. Her vision narrowed. She forced the plane level again, gasping, sweat pouring down her temple. It was still alive. Below, soldiers gripped their helmets, watching in silent horror. If even her cannon couldn't break it. In the trench, the UAV operator's knuckles whitened on his controls. His drone buzzed overhead, silent witness. He whispered to himself, "Come on, come on." His laser marked again, painting a seam along the tread. A diamond blinked on HUD. She banked, teeth clenched. She trusted him now, trusted the unseen ally who refused to give up. The cannon thundered. Rounds ripped into the marked spot. Sparks burst. The tread buckled, twisting sideways, dragging the giant off balance. It staggered. The trenches erupted in roars. Soldiers who had been moments from despair bellowed with raw throats, their voices cracking under relief and disbelief. The giant wasn't dead, but it had stumbled. Didn't celebrate. She knew the difference between a wound and a kill. The monster still moved, still aimed, still hunted. She circled wide, scanning for her next angle, every nerve alive with urgency. The colonel in the bunker leaned over the table, whispering hoarsely, "She's doing it, she's actually doing it." His officers stared, too stunned to respond, but felt the truth deeper than their disbelief. The warthog was running low on ammo, on fuel, on strength. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the throttle. Her body felt hollow, her breath sharp. She could not keep this up forever. And yet she knew she would. She angled into another climb, circling into the sun once more. The giant tracked her every move. Its turret followed, relentless, unshaken by fear or fatigue. This duel wasn't just steel against steel. It was will against will. Whispered into the silence of her cockpit, "All right then, let's end this." The dive began. From the ridges, soldiers lifted their heads, breath held, eyes wide. They felt the sky itself lean with her, felt the air tremble with the howl of her engines. The GAU-8 bellowed again, not a burst this time, but a continuous roar. Shells hammered into the wounded flank, deeper, harder, chewing into the seams already torn. Fire erupted. Smoke poured. The beast groaned, a terrible sound of steel buckling. Then it collapsed. The explosion split the plane, a tower of fire punching skyward, hurling armor and debris in every direction. The shockwave rolled over the trenches, knocking men flat, rattling helmets. For a moment, the world was only light and thunder. Pulled up through the fire, canopy glowing orange, wings trailing smoke. Her chest heaved, eyes locked on the inferno below. The monster was gone. The trenches erupted in wild, broken cheers. Soldiers clung to each other, laughing, shouting, sobbing all at once. The colonel lowered his binoculars, his voice cracking with disbelief. "She did it," he whispered. "By God, she did it." Steadied her machine, but alive. Her breath came ragged, her arms ached, her entire body screamed, but her eyes burned steady. She had met the impossible and broken it. Above the plains, the warthog circled once more, wings glinting in fading light. The lone predator who had turned back the tide. The battlefield trembled beneath her. The soldiers below, still shaken, still alive, stared upward not at a machine, but at a silhouette that meant something larger. Proof that even the strongest tide could falter. Proof that courage mattered more than steel. Whispered to herself, almost too quiet for her own ears. Not obsolete, not yet. The battlefield held its breath again, because no one believed it was over, not yet. How long could one person carry the weight of an entire battlefield? Asked herself that question as the sky trembled with smoke, her hands trembling against the stick. The A-10's engine still roared, its battered wings held steady, but every vibration passed through her bones now. She could feel fatigue in her shoulders, in her spine, in the corners of her eyes that burned from sweat and strain. The monster tank lay broken in flames below, a blackened husk glowing orange at the seams. Around it, smaller wrecks smoldered, the ground with craters. Infantry in the trenches stared at the inferno with wild eyes, some laughing, some crying, most too stunned to do either. But didn't feel triumph, she felt emptiness. Her gauges blinked warnings, ammunition dangerously low, fuel running thin. She had fought longer and harder than any mission was meant to last. Her aircraft had taken punishment beyond reason. And yet, as she circled over the battlefield, her body sagged into the seat with a heaviness she couldn't shake. Hope below was fragile, like glass in shaking hands, and hope demanded she keep flying. The radio crackled, the colonel's voice breaking through. For the first time, it wasn't dismissive. It wasn't sharp. It was reverent. "Pilot, you've done enough. Bring her home, we'll regroup. You've given us time." His words were a balm, but also a blade. He didn't understand. Time wasn't enough. Not when the enemy hadn't stopped moving. Through the smoke, fresh lines of armor crawled into view. Smaller than the behemoth she'd destroyed, but more numerous. An entire second wave grinding forward, turrets already swiveling, the column reorganizing with ruthless discipline. His chest tightened. The monster had only been the beginning. Her finger hovered over the radio. She could tell him, she could tell them all, that she had nothing left, that the fight was impossible now, that someone else would have to stand in the breach. But her lips never moved. Instead, she breathed out slowly, her voice too soft to be heard by anyone but the battered warthog around her. One more run, just one more. She banked, diving again, cannon spitting bursts of depleted uranium into the lead tank. The explosion tore it open, fire spiraling into the sky. The column slowed, but it didn't stop. More came, always more. Her HUD blinked again, another marker from the unseen UAV operator. He was still there, still risking his own position to guide her. Another target lit up in her visor. She swung wide, losing the last of her cluster bombs into the ridge. Launchers hidden in camouflage erupted in fire, secondary detonations cracking across the plain. Her breath caught. She was down to cannon alone now. No bombs, no missiles, just the GAU-8's growl and what fuel she had left. "Still with me," she whispered to the machine, to herself, to the unseen ally below. Tracer fire clawed up at her, thicker now, disciplined volleys from dozens of barrels. She ducked low, weaving between them, the cockpit rattling like it might fall apart in her hands. Shards of flak peppered her wings. One round cracked the canopy, spiderwebbing the glass beside her helmet. She flinched, heart leaping, but the glass held. The soldiers below saw it all, saw her dive again, canopy flashing in the firelight, cannon snarling as another tank folded under her fury. They screamed her name now. A chant, a prayer. But didn't hear the voices. She heard only the alarms. Fuel gauge dipping lower, warning lights blinking red, engine temperature climbing. Her body ached, every muscle heavy, her eyelids threatening to close. She thought of home, not a place, but the quiet she hadn't known in years. A room without radios, without alarms, without smoke. Would she ever see it again? Her father's words echoed in her memory, old and sharp. "They'll never let you, not in combat, not really." Her reply, years younger, "Then I'll fight twice as hard." She had, and now the cost pressed down on her like the weight of the entire sky. The second wave pressed forward. Dozens of tanks, smaller but relentless, moving in perfect formation. Shells rained on the ridges, trenches buckling. Soldiers cried out, scrambling for cover. Angled for another dive. Her cannon barked, tearing into a column of armor, rounds piercing, flames bursting. She pulled up again, sweat pouring, chest heaving. The UAV operator marked another. She turned, fired, another tank folded. Again. Her rounds ticked lower, the counter flashing. Below in the trenches, soldiers shouted to each other, voices hoarse. Some begged her to keep going. Others begged her to leave before she was torn apart. They watched her silhouette carve against the smoke, every pass a gamble between salvation and disaster. In the bunker, the colonel slammed his fist into the table, his face pale. She can't keep this up. She'll burn out before they do. But still, he didn't call her back. He couldn't. His vision blurred. She blinked hard, pulling herself back into focus. The gauges blurred too, numbers dancing. She gritted her teeth. She couldn't let fatigue steal her now, not when they needed her most. Her radio crackled faintly. A younger voice, hesitant, the UAV operator breaking silence. You don't have to do this alone." She almost laughed, almost, but the sound came out broken, a breathless gasp. "I know," she whispered, "but I do." She dove again, cannon snarling, tearing through another tank. Flames rose, black smoke curling into the twilight sky. Her counter hit near empty. Only a handful of rounds remained. She pulled up, eyes wide, breath sharp. She had bought time, destroyed dozens, broken the monster. And yet the column still crawled forward, smaller now, weaker, but still moving. Her heart thudded against her ribs. Was this what victory looked like? Not triumph, but exhaustion, surviving by inches, holding the line for just one more moment. The plane shuddered again, metal groaning under strain. She whispered, her voice cracking, "I can't, but her hands never left the controls." The battlefield below burned, alive with fire and screams and hope and despair all tangled together. Soldiers clung to the ground, some shouting her name, some praying, all waiting for her next move. Leveled out, the warthog rattling wings. Her breath came shallow, chest tight. She didn't know if she had another dive in her. But she knew she would try. Because if she didn't, no one else could. How do you keep fighting when there's nothing left to fight with? Stared at her ammunition counter, blinking nearly empty, the digits like a cruel heartbeat in her visor. The cannon that had shredded columns of steel, the weapon that had kept men alive in their trenches, was almost dry. Every dive, every burst, had carved the number lower. Now it was down to the last handful of rounds. Her fuel gauge wasn't much better. The needle trembled near the red, warning lights pulsing on her panel. The warthog had carried her further than reason, but even stubborn machines had limits. Below, the second wave pressed forward. Not as massive as before, not as terrifying as the behemoth she had destroyed, but still relentless. Dozens of tanks crawled through fire and wreckage, their turrets swinging with disciplined rhythm. Each blast from their barrels tore another hole in the earth, shook another trench. Soldiers ducked, clinging to crumbling cover. Their earlier cheers had faded into silence, replaced with raw gasps, frantic orders and prayers mumbled between teeth. The chant of her name was gone now, not out of disbelief, but out of fear that calling it would make her vanish. In the bunker, the colonel pressed his palms into the table so hard his knuckles blanched. He wanted to order her back. He wanted to save the last spark holding his men together. But he couldn't, because he knew, without her, there was nothing. Circled high, her body sagging in the harness, eyes burning. Every muscle begged her to stop. Every warning light begged her to land. Her heart begged for rest. But the battlefield begged louder. She banked into another dive, the warthog trembling as it cut through smoke. She lined up her reticle, pressed the trigger. The GAU-8 snarled, coughing its last fury into the lead tank. Armor split, fire erupted, another machine folded into ruin. The cannon fell silent. Her counter read 0. Pulled up, breath ragged, chest hollow. Her last roar had been spent. The warthog carried nothing but its frame and the will of the woman inside it. The trenches below saw it too. They knew. Their eyes lifted, searching the sky, desperate for another growl of salvation. When it didn't come, their shoulders slumped. The tide pressed in again, heavier, closer. Vision blurred with tears she didn't want. Not from fear, but from the ache of knowing she had given everything and it still wasn't enough. She had broken the monster. She had shattered columns. She had bought time, but the enemy still crawled forward. Her radio crackled faintly, the young UAV operator's voice breaking through. They're almost on us, if you've got anything left." Her throat closed. She almost said the truth, "I don't." But the words stuck. Because if she admitted it, if she let them hear that emptiness in her voice, hope would shatter on the ground. Men would break. The line would crumble. So instead, she forced her voice steady, though it cracked at the edges. "I'm not done yet." She banked again, wings, cannon empty. What could she do? She asked herself that as the horizon spun in her canopy. What could one plane without ammunition, without fuel, without strength, possibly do against an army still pressing forward? The answer came not from strategy, but from instinct. She dove, not at the tanks this time, at the ground. Low, so low that her engines screamed over the soil, her wings cutting through the smoke just above the trenches. Soldiers ducked, eyes wide, as her shadow swept over them. The Warthog thundered past, the roar of its engines shaking their bones. It wasn't a strike, it was a scream, a reminder. She was still there, still circling, still refusing to leave. And sometimes, defiance was louder than gunfire. The tanks hesitated, their turrets pausing, their formations slowing as her shadow carved across them again. She banked around, engines howling, diving low once more, streaking just above their barrels, daring them to fire at her instead of the men below. They did. Shells arced upward, detonating in the sky, chasing her silhouette. Every shot at her was a shot not fired into the trenches. Every second she bought was another life spared. But every second also burned more fuel. His chest tightened. She couldn't keep this up much longer. The Warthog drank greedily from nearly empty tanks, its gauges trembling on the edge. The engine whine deepened, a warning she couldn't ignore. In the trench, the UAV operator clutched his controls, eyes fixed on his small screen. His drone buzzed high above, invisible in the smoke. He whispered to himself almost like a prayer, "Hold on, just hold on." And then a flicker. His feed caught something. Shadows moving in the distance, larger than tanks, shapes he hadn't seen before. His stomach dropped. Reinforcements, not theirs. Another enemy wave crawling closer, still beyond the battlefield but on its way. He swallowed hard, hands shaking. If he told her, if he told them all, the last strands of hope might snap. He hesitated, sweat dripping down his temple. He whispered, "Not yet, not yet." Angled higher, circling once more, searching for anything left to strike. There was nothing. She had spent it all. All she had left was herself. Her father's voice returned, old and sharp. "They'll never let you, not in combat, not really." Her own reply echoed back, "Then I'll fight twice as hard." She had, and still it wasn't enough. Her throat tightened, but she forced the thought down. Enough wasn't her choice. Enough was theirs, the soldiers in the dirt who still looked up every time her shadow crossed the sky. She whispered into the cockpit, voice breaking, "Then I'll fly twice as long." The colonel in the bunker stared at the fading light on the horizon, his voice hoarse. "She's still up there, she hasn't left." His officers said nothing. Some couldn't even look at him. They knew it wasn't strategy keeping them alive anymore. It was one woman's refusal to quit. Steadied her breath, eyes burning. She didn't know how much longer the Warthog could fly. She didn't know how much longer she could. But she knew one thing. She would not land while they still needed her shadow in the sky. So she banked again, into the smoke, into the fading sun, into the jaws of the advancing tide. And the battlefield, broken and burning, clung to her silhouette like the last thread holding back the dark. What happens when even defiance begins to run out? Asked herself that as her fuel gauge dipped lower, the needle trembling against the red. Warning lights pulsed across her cockpit, angry reminders that the warthog couldn't fly forever. Every pass, every low run across the battlefield drained what little remained. She banked wide, engines rumbling, wings shuddering from holes peppered through their skin. Below her, the plain was a graveyard of burning metal. Tank carcasses smoldered in heaps, smoke pouring skyward in black columns. The monster lay silent still, its broken carcass glowing faintly under the fatting sun. But further out, beyond the wreckage, more shapes were crawling forward. Reinforcements. The UAV operator saw them first, his drone catching silhouettes just beyond the haze. Larger groups, more armor, their numbers staggering. His throat tightened. He wanted to call it out, to tell the colonel, to warn, but the words stuck. How do you tell men already breaking that another storm is coming? How do you tell the lone pilot above them that her war was about to restart with even worse odds? He gripped his controls, whispering to himself, "Not yet, not yet." Hadn't seen them. Not yet. She focused only on the tide still pressing against the trenches, the smaller wave that had crawled into the ruins left behind. Dozens of tanks still moved, slower, more cautious now, their turrets swiveling with discipline. Every so often one would fire and another trench would collapse, another soldier cry out. She dove low again, her engines thundering across the plain. She had no rounds to fire, no bombs to drop. All she could do was scream across the battlefield with the roar of her wings, and still, it worked. The tanks hesitated. Soldiers in the trenches raised their heads. Her shadow streaked across them, and they remembered they weren't alone. But felt it. Every dive burned more fuel. Every second in the sky stole from the last she might have. The warthog was thirsty, greedy, insatiable, and her tanks were nearly dry. Her hands shook faintly against the stick. Her breath came shallow through the mask. Fatigue was no longer background. It was claws at her shoulders, weight pressing her down. She blinked hard, fighting the blur creeping at the edges of her vision. Her radio crackled, the colonel's voice hoarse, softer than she'd ever heard it. "Pilot, you've done more than enough. We can't ask you to." She cut him off. "You didn't ask, I chose." There was silence on the line, only static, heavy like unspoken words held back. She circled higher, eyes narrowing on the column still pressing forward. She thought of the soldiers in the dirt, the ones who had looked up with hope each time her engines roared overhead. She thought of the young voice on the radio, hesitant but steady, the unseen ally guiding her fire. She thought of her father, of his disbelief, of her own stubborn reply. "Then I'll fight twice as hard." Her lips parted, voice soft. "Then I'll fly twice as long." Her fuel gauge blinked again, critical. The colonel knew it too. He turned from the map table, packing the bunker, voice cracking with frustration. "She'll fall out of the sky if she stays. She'll burn alive in that cockpit." His officers said nothing. Their silence was consent. They had seen too much to believe in reason anymore. Banked into another dive, low enough to skim treetops, her engines roaring across the tanks. Shells fired upward, detonating in the sky. Shrapnel peppered her wings. One round struck near the tail, alarms flaring, the plane jerking violently. She gritted her teeth, forcing it level again. The trenches below roared as her shadow swept across them. Men who had been pressed flat against the dirt lifted their rifles again, firing wildly, courage reborn for a few seconds more. But's chest tightened. She couldn't do this forever, and she knew what came when the fuel was gone. The thought cut deeper than any shrapnel. She could land, she could retreat, save herself, save the aircraft, return to base and fight another day. That was logic, that was survival. But if she left, what would remain here? Trenches collapsing, soldiers alone, the tide rolling over them like an ocean swallowing stones. Her hands trembled. She could feel the decision looming, heavier than the monster she had faced. Survival or sacrifice, self or many. Her breath hitched. She didn't want to die. Not here, not like this, in a cockpit rattling apart. She wanted to live, to see home again, to feel sunlight without smoke. But she looked down, at the soldiers who had chanted her name, at the broken colonel who had finally believed, at the young voice on the radio who had risked everything to help her. She whispered into the silence, voice cracking, "If it costs me, let it cost me." The UAV operator's screen flickered. He saw the reinforcements drawing closer now, engines rumbling like distant thunder. His chest clenched. He couldn't hide it anymore. He pressed his radio, voice breaking. "They're coming, more of them, bigger. I don't know if you can hold them." His eyes closed for a moment, lashes wet with sweat and tears. She breathed out, long, slow. "Then I'll hold them anyway." Her father's voice echoed again in memory. "They'll never let you. Not in combat, not really." Her own reply, sharper now, older, forged by fire. "Then I'll fight until they remember my name." Her fuel gauge blinked again, louder now, insistent. She had minutes left, maybe less. The Warthog groaned, its engine straining. The decision pressed harder, turn back now or commit everything. She angled into another circle, the sun dipping low, painting the battlefield in bruised orange. Below, soldiers watched her silhouette trace against the sky, their eyes wide, their hearts tethered to her. In the bunker, the colonel whispered to no one, to himself, to God, "Please, not like this. Don't let her go like this." But wasn't listening anymore. Her world had narrowed to the horizon, to the smoke, to the line of steel still pressing forward. She steadied her breath, steadied her hands, steadied her soul. And she whispered, so quiet the cockpit barely caught it, "Then let this be enough." The Warthog banked one last time, dipping into the smoke, into the roar, into the fire. The battlefield trembled, waiting for her final choice. What does it feel like when you know this might be the last time you breathe? Asked herself that as the canopy glowed with the red of warning lights. Her fuel gauge hovered at nothing, the needle shaking like it didn't want to admit the truth. The Warthog's engines coughed, the guttural roar fatting for half seconds before catching again. Each shudder told her what she already knew. Time was gone. Below her, the battlefield still writhed. The second wave of tanks pressed closer, treads grinding through fire, turrets spitting steel into the trenches. Soldiers screamed as dirt rained, as bunkers collapsed, as the line cracked another inch. They were still fighting, rifles snapping, mortars thumping, but it was a fight against inevitability. And now the reinforcements loomed. The UAV operator's drone had caught them clearly. Another column, bigger, crawling toward the horizon like a shadow stretching across the plain. Hadn't seen them yet with her own eyes, but she felt them. She felt their presence in her chest, in the way the ground seemed to tremble harder with every passing minute. The colonel in the bunker paced in silence. His officers stared at him, waiting for orders. None came. He had no words left, no strategies left. Only a truth he didn't want to face. The survival of his men no longer rested in maps or maneuvers. It rested in the hands of a woman he'd never trusted until today. His hands rested on the stick. Her gloves were damp, her arms heavy, her shoulders burning. She blinked hard, the blur at the edges of her vision creeping closer with every second. Her breath was shallow, almost ragged. She could still turn back. She knew the math. If she cut hard now, pointed the Warthog west, pushed the throttle to the last drop, she might make it back to base. Limp home on fumes. Survive. But the thought felt hollow. Survival meant leaving them, leaving the trenches, leaving the voices that had chanted her name, leaving the colonel who had finally believed, leaving the young man guiding her from the shadows. She whispered into her mask, voice cracked. "If I leave, they die. If I stay, maybe I do. What's the difference if the line holds?" Her father's voice came back, old and stubborn. "They'll never let you. Not in combat, not really." Her reply now, sharper, truer, burning in her chest. "Then I'll make them remember me." She banked low, engines straining, wings cutting through smoke. The roar swept over the trenches, soldiers lifting their heads again, hope flickering for just a moment longer. The UAV operator's voice cracked over the radio. "You don't have the fuel. If you stay, you won't get back." She didn't answer, not with words. She dove lower, closer, the shadow of her warthog streaking across the tanks. Fire erupted upward, shells detonating in the air, chasing her silhouette. She pulled through it, cockpit rattling, canopy peppered with shrapnel. Her breath steadied. Her decision was already made. The colonel slammed his fist against the wall, voice hoarse, almost pleading. Why doesn't she turn back? Why doesn't she save herself? But no one answered. They all knew. Angled into the climb again, the sun dipping lower, painting the horizon blood orange. She steadied her breath, her voice soft, a prayer not to God but to the machine around her. One last time, just one. The tanks pressed forward, the trenches screamed, the battlefield begged. She dove. Not at the columns this time, not at the reinforcements, at the heart. The bridge across the narrow riverbed where the reinforcements would cross, the only path strong enough to carry their weight. Her empty cannon snarled a hollow click, no rounds left. She didn't care. Her wings cut the air, her engines screamed. The ground rushed up, the bridge growing larger in her canopy. The UAV operator saw it, his breath catching. He whispered, horrified, "No, she's not." The colonel froze, realization tearing through him. His lips parted, but no words came. Soldiers in the trenches lifted their heads as her engines roared louder than ever, the sound tearing the sky open. They saw her dive lower, faster. Their eyes widened. Some screamed her name. Some begged her to pull up. Others simply stared, tears cutting through dust on their faces. His breath slowed. Her chest was calm, her heart beat steady. For the first time all day, she felt weightless. She thought of home, of quiet mornings without alarms, of her father's disbelieving eyes, of the sky she had always loved, even when it burned. And she thought of the men below, their faces tilted upward, their hope resting in her shadow. Her voice cracked in the silence. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The warthog screamed into the bridge. Light, fire, thunder. The explosion split the horizon, a detonation that shook the ground for miles. The bridge shattered in a bloom of steel and stone, debris hurling skyward, collapsing into the riverbed below. Flames rippled outward, licking across tanks caught too close. The shockwave threw soldiers flat, rattled bunkers, cracked helmets. And in the sky, there was no silhouette anymore. Only fire trailing down into ruin. The battlefield went silent. The tanks ground to a halt, their advance broken. The reinforcements beyond the river stopped dead, their path severed. The column had stalled, chaos erupting in their ranks. For the first time, the enemy faltered. In the trenches, soldiers pushed themselves up from the dirt, staring wide-eyed at the inferno where the bridge had been. Some wept, some screamed. Others simply pressed their foreheads into the earth, whispering thanks through sobs. The UAV operator sat frozen, controls trembling in his hands, eyes wet. His voice cracked into the radio, barely audible. She did it. In the bunker, the colonel gripped the table, his face pale, his eyes glassy. His voice came out hoarse, almost broken. One aircraft, one pilot, and she stopped them all. Above the battlefield, the sky burned orange with smoke and fire. The roar of her engines was gone, but its echo remained in every heart that had heard it. The line had held. At the cost of her. What does silence sound like when it comes after thunder? The battlefield answered that question. For the first time in hours, the plane held its breath. No cannon roared. No engines growled. Only fire crackled through smoke and the groans of steel settling into wreckage. The bridge was gone. A charred scar cut across the riverbed, smoke rising from the shattered stone and twisted rebar. Tanks that had been crawling toward it now stood frozen, their advance cut off in an instant. Reinforcements on the far side faltered, their momentum severed. Confusion rippled through their formations, commanders shouting orders that didn't carry, men staring at the inferno where the path had once been. And in the sky there was nothing. No roar of engines, no shadow sweeping across trenches. The sound that had held men together was gone. The trenches themselves were a tangle of disbelief. Soldiers pressed their faces into the dirt, whispering thanks between sobs. Others stared upward with wet eyes, searching for a silhouette they knew would never return. Some laughed, not in joy, but in that wild, broken way men laugh when they can't understand why they're still alive. One soldier, his hand still shaking around his rifle, whispered hoarsely, "She didn't leave us. She never left us." Another pressed a dirt-streaked hand over his heart, nodding wordlessly. In the bunker, the colonel gripped the table as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. His officers watched him in silence, their faces pale, their eyes wet. No one spoke. No one dared. Finally his lips parted, his voice hoarse, raw. "We wrote her off. We doubted her. We didn't even see her until she stood alone in the sky, and she gave us everything." His words hung heavy, not just in the air but in their chests. None of them argued. None of them excused themselves. Shame burned behind their eyes, mingling with awe. Far from the bunker, in a shallow trench, the UAV operator clutched his battered controls, the drone's feed still flickering faintly on his screen. The image showed only smoke now, flames licking across wreckage, the bridge in ruins. His hands trembled. His throat tightened. He whispered. He had never seen her face, had only known her voice, clipped and steady, and the way she had followed his markers without hesitation. But he felt like he had known her forever. In those brief exchanges, in that shared defiance against impossible odds, something had bound them, and now she was gone. He pressed his forehead into the dirt, the controls shaking in his grip, his voice breaking. "You didn't have to do it. You didn't have to give everything." But deep down he knew she did, because no one else could. The battlefield slowly came alive again. Soldiers rose from the trenches, shaky but breathing, their eyes still wide. Some began shouting orders, reorganizing, pulling the wounded back. Others simply stood, staring at the sky as if expecting her silhouette to return. But was not returning. Her story, however, was already moving through them. Each soldier who had seen her dives, who had felt the roar of her engines above their helmets, carried that sound inside now. The memory of defiance. The proof that one act, one person, could shift the weight of an entire battle. In the bunker, the colonel finally sat down, his shoulders heavy, his eyes wet. He whispered to himself, not for the officers, not for anyone else, only for her. "You stopped them, you held the line, and will carry your name." The UAV operator stared at his fatting screen, his voice steadying through grief. She wasn't obsolete. She was the only one who mattered. Night crept slowly across the plain, the fires still glowing, the smoke curling into stars. The tanks remained frozen, their advance shattered not by superior numbers, not by overwhelming force, but by one pilot who refused to quit. The soldiers who had thought themselves already dead now stood alive because she had stayed in the sky. And though her machine had fallen, though her body was gone, her defiance still echoed in the dirt, in the fire, in their breaths. For days the enemy hesitated, stunned by the loss of their bridge, by the chaos of their stalled advance. And in that hesitation, the defense found time to regroup, to reinforce, to turn a hopeless collapse into survival. Had given them that. Not just with steel, not just with fire, but with will. With the stubbornness to fight when reason said stop. With the courage to act when silence would have been easier. Her father's words echoed no more. The world would remember her not as the woman dismissed, ignored, doubted, but as the pilot who turned the tide with nothing left to give but herself. And perhaps that was enough. Because sometimes war isn't about glory. Sometimes it isn't about winning. Sometimes it's about one voice, one act, One sacrifice that says to those left behind, "You matter, so I will not leave you." The colonel, the operator, the soldiers in the trenches, they would tell her story, not as myth, not as legend, but as truth, as memory. And the memory would outlast steel. Above the plain, the sky was quiet now. But in that quiet, her roar still lingered, stitched into the hearts of those who had heard it. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.